Before I jump into the message for today, just want to thank Angie for doing the opening and Chewy for sharing his testimony, which was not planned, but that was great, and we're glad that he did that. And I want to say thank you to the nursing students for being here again. What they're doing is really quite cool. There's a lot of folk that come through our food pantry that need help, but they don't know how to get it. And they're, I think, eligible to get that kind of help, but getting on the computer, getting registered is a huge climb. And so I sat down with this group, and I was like, well, I got this kind of crazy idea that maybe you guys could help people get registered. And they're like, yeah, we got that. So I just praise you guys, and I think I shared with you I was a chaplain for a year, and nurses are amazing. So, yeah. Got a nurse back there. So we are in the last week of a sermon series, a 5-week sermon series titled Next Steps to Spiritual Growth. And I love it when we're finishing a series because I always feel like we've covered a lot of ground, that we've learned a lot. At least I know I've learned a lot through the process of doing these series. And if you missed part of it, I got some good news for you. In your bulletins, we have the web address, and we post all the messages online. And if you're here for the first time today, I got also good news for you. You came for the best part. Okay, it's kind of like, the culmination of a movie, the big action scene at the end, although there won't be a whole lot of action. We did that earlier with the tug of rope, but you came for the best part because we have been working towards this message all the way through because what we've been doing is talking about these stages of spiritual growth, and today we're going to talk about the final stage where you become the most mature person of faith that you can become. So it's important to know that behind this is actually a research study that was done. It's presented in a book called Move, put out in 2011. The research study involved 250,000 people. If you know anything about research studies, that's a ton of people. 1,000 churches were involved. And in that study, they were looking at spiritual growth. And what they found is that even though your spiritual path is unique, it follows a familiar pattern. In fact, according to the authors, it follows a pattern like this. You start off as exploring Christ, then move to growing, close, and then finally Christ-centered. Let's talk about that just for a moment. We all start at the exploring Christ. We all start at this place where we're asking questions about who is this Jesus? Is he a prophet? Is he just a wise teacher? Is he made up, right? Is he fictional? Or is he indeed the Son of God? And there's a lot of it's a head game. There's a lot of questions that we got to get through. And if we can find some answers to those questions, we eventually can make a commitment and say, I don't know all there is to know about Jesus. I still got some questions. But I know enough to say that I want to follow this Jesus. And that's the key thing that moves from exploring to Christ to growing to Christ. You say, hey, I want to follow. But you don't really know how to follow. And that's the big thing going on in the second stage, growing in Christ. And so you're trying to figure that out. What does it mean to have a relationship with Jesus? What does this require of me? What must I do? And if you figure that out, eventually, over time, you'll begin to develop a personal relationship with Jesus. It's not just about what the pastor said or your mom or dad said or somebody said. It becomes personal for you. In fact, last week we talked about how people that move from stage 2 to 3, the key idea is that Jesus has left the building. Meaning that he's no longer just in church. In fact, when you drive out of church, when you're in the close to Christ stage, it looks like this. Next slide. You got Jesus right next to you, right? That Jesus actually leaves church with you. You no longer go to church to see Jesus, but he goes home with you, and he goes to school with you, he goes to work with you, because it's now become personal. It's moved from the head down into the heart. And it's truly personal. And he's influencing your life in daily ways. So today we're going to talk about this last stage, Christ-centered. And to get at that, I want to tell you 2 stories that come from one of the authors of the book, Move. And she tells these stories to make a point about what it means to be Christ-centered. So here's the first one. This is Callie Parkinson. And the first story is about the birth of her daughter. And her baby girl is born. And the baby is doing what babies do. This newborn baby, it's crying. The baby's crying. And so Callie, she says, all these years later, I remember my response. I started singing, hush, little baby, don't say a word. Sing it with me now. Mama's gonna buy you a mockingbird. If that mockingbird don't sing, Daddy's gonna buy you a diamond ring. Crazy lyrics, right? Have you ever thought about the lyrics? Like, why do we sing that to a kid? But she's saying that to her little girl, and little baby girl's crying, but mom begins to sing, and the baby stops crying and opens her big blue eyes and looks at her mom with this expression that's like, I know you. I know you somehow. And that intimacy, that knowing, that is a key characteristic of this final stage of spiritual growth. We get to this point where you just kind of know God, as if you might have originated from God, as if God was with you all your life and even before you were born. That intimacy is key. I know you. The second story is not as happy. This involves her other child, her son, who was in a biking accident, and he sustained a head injury. And she describes the night that happened. She's in the ER, and the doctors come up and they tell her that your son is unlikely to live through the night, that we've done everything that we could do, and the swelling on the brain is immense. And he'll be lucky if he lives, and if he does live, he probably won't live a very good life. And Callie says that she realized the doctors could not save my son. God was all I had left. So she tells about how she leaves the waiting room or the quiet room where the doctor gave the news, and she goes out and there's like this orange carpet, and she sits down on the orange carpet and she prays. She says something to the fact of, God, I know that you can do miracles. Now would be a good time for one. Miraculously, her son recovers. And she says that he's now married and he has a house and he's seizure-free. But she tells the story not to talk about the miraculous character of God and the things that God can do, but she tells it to make a different point. And I think the best way to get at that is to hear a few more of her words. So I'm going to read a few words of hers. Next slide. I learned firsthand that all the human trappings of parental protection, medical solutions, and worldly security are an illusion. It takes just a phone call to strip them away. Through this experience, the one with her son, God taught me to stop putting my faith in the things of this world and to depend fully on Christ. But that moment on the orange carpet was the first of many choices I would make and continue to make each day to surrender my dependence on an untrustworthy world for reliance on an unfailing Jesus. Now, I've met people who look at sold out, totally bought in Christians as if they are kind of missing something, as if they're naive, as if they haven't studied enough, read enough, lived long enough. Like, why would you trust in this imaginary thing that you call God? But I think the reality is quite different. That those who really get it, they've lived enough life to see that while medicine and nurses and doctors can do a whole lot, while our relationships and our friendships and our spouses can mean a whole lot, that eventually all those worldly things that promise to keep us safe and to support us through the end, all those things eventually come up short. And whether you choose to or not, eventually you are going to be dependent on God. And so those who are in this final stage of spiritual growth, they figured this out, that really we're already in God's hands. And the key is surrender. So what I'm going to do, here's a definition. So a Christ-centered person is somebody who knows Christ intimately and has surrendered themselves to Christ's way of living in the world. Because that's different than how we typically live. Knows Christ intimately, I know you, and then has learned to surrender to God's will, to God's way for living in the world. So I'm going to bring us to a story from Matthew 16, and I would love to tell you all about this guy, Matthew, but we don't have time for that, but let me just say a few things. When we open up the book of Matthew, you got to know that Matthew was like one of the worst people possible in Jesus' day. He was a tax collector. There were sinners and tax collectors. They had a separate category for tax collectors because sinners would be offended to be grouped in with the tax collectors. That's how bad they were. All right? And so when we open up Matthew, we know that nobody is beyond God's reach because this tax collector, this person that we've all just finished with, forget about him, he actually gets to follow Jesus and he has a change of heart. And he gets the honor of being credited with this story about Jesus, this gospel. So we're going to jump in, and it starts this way. This is Jesus talking, and this is an exploring Christ question. And what's cool about what I'm about to show you is it actually hits on all these stages of spiritual growth we've been talking about for the last month. What are people saying about who the Son of Man is? Son of Man is a nickname that Jesus gives to himself. What are people saying about who the Son of Man is, who I am? Look at the response. They replied, some think he is John the Baptizer. Some say Elijah. Some say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. So they're exploring, who is this Jesus? Some say it's this guy, some say it's that. We don't really know. But look at what Peter says. Simon Peter said, you're the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of the living God. You're the anointed one, the one we've been waiting for, the one that's going to change everything, the one that we can follow. You're the guy. Peter, he's no longer exploring Christ. He's taken a step. He's moved in terms of these stages. He's at least in the growing in Christ. In fact, actually what we're going to find out is that he's even a stage farther. Look at this. Jesus came back, God bless you, Simon, son of Jonah. You know that Jesus is happy when he refers to you by your father as well. Simon, son of Jonah, you didn't get that answer out of books or from teachers. This is not a head thing. You've gotten down to the level of the heart. You've made that transition. You've asked all the questions, and now there's something within you you've tapped into. You know, even on a deeper level, you didn't get that answer out of books or from teachers. In fact, my Father in heaven, God himself, let you in on the secret of who I really am. And he says this to him because it's possible that after we've asked a bunch of questions, and we should ask questions, after we've done some reading, we've talked to some people, and we should do all that, it is possible to tap into this inner knowing about God. God can connect with you directly. And he does with Peter, and he can with you if you continue to grow in your spiritual life. And then look at this. And now, I'm going to tell you who you are, really are. Now that you understand who I am, I'm going to tell you about who you are. Now that you understand my identity, let me tell you about your identity. And man, I wish I could preach on this topic right now, but we got to move on. Going on. Next slide. You are Peter, a rock. So Peter is actually a nickname. We've talked about that before, but if you didn't know, his real name is Simon. Peter is a nickname, which means rock. You are Peter, a rock. This is the rock on which I will put together my church, my gathering, my movement, a church so expansive with energy that not even the gates of hell can stop it. Just imagine that for a moment. You get the answer right on the test. Who do people say I am? You're the Christ. Way to go, Simon, son of Jonah. Let me tell you who you are. You are a rock. And on this rock, I'm going to build my movement, my church, and nothing, not even the gates of hell, can stop it. Do you think Peter's getting a little bit of a rise of his ego at the moment? I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? It'd be hard to stay humble if you heard this. And so Peter's like, hey, I'm the rock, nothing's going to move me. All right, things are going good. I'm with this Jesus. I'm going to be a key part of it. I like this. I like where this is going. But look at what Jesus says next. Then Jesus made it clear to his disciples that it was necessary for him to go to Jerusalem. Wait, why would you go to Jerusalem? That's where the people who want to kill you and arrest you, that's where they all are. Why would you go there? Jesus says it's necessary for me to go to Jerusalem and submit, or to use our word of the day, surrender to an ordeal of suffering and be killed. And on the third day, be raised up alive again. It's necessary for me to go. I got to go to this place that I don't necessarily want to go to, but I need to surrender. Peter, he's not having it. Peter took Jesus in the hand and protesting and says, impossible, master, that can never be. Jesus replies, but Jesus didn't swear, Peter, get out of my way. Satan, get lost. You have no idea how God works. Peter goes from getting the answer right to being said that you're a rock, and on this rock I'm going to build my church, and then gets called Satan. That's quite a change in direction, right? Why is Jesus so tough on Peter? What did Peter do so wrong? He just doesn't want to see Jesus die, right? In the first week, I introduced this concept. We started off this series talking about if you were to make progress in your spiritual life this year, what would you be making progress towards? If you were to grow spiritually, what does that really mean? And I said that I think Jesus would teach you this. He would say that spiritual growth is about moving from being selfish to selfless. You see, we all start off as babies, right? And babies, as cute as they are the most selfish people we know. My little son, Jack, super cute, super selfish. He hasn't asked me about my day once, hasn't asked me if I'm hungry, none of that. But he smiles and he's cute, so it's all good. But if he's that way when he's an adult, that's a problem, isn't it? And if you're honest, your worst moments, your missed opportunities, those broken relationships, if you were to really drill down, it's selfishness. You're self-absorbed, only concerned for yourself. In your best moments, and the best people you know, that's the selfless moments. That's the selfless people. And Jesus is trying to take us towards this selfless life. And Peter, he's going the wrong direction. Peter's saying, I'm the rock. And the church is going to be built on me, and I see how this thing's going, and I got this Jesus guy with me, and he just fed a bunch of people and walked on water, so I'm going to want to keep him around, and I like where this is going. And then Jesus says it's going in this other direction that Peter didn't expect, and Peter is resisting. Peter's saying, no, Jesus, it can't be that way. But Jesus is saying, look, hey, I know something about surrender. I know something about the fact that God sometimes leads us to places we wouldn't choose for ourselves. And I know something about a faithful God who I'm going to follow, because the thing that Peter seems to miss is that Jesus not only is going to die, but he's going to rise again. It's like Peter didn't even hear that part. And so Jesus, he's trying to pull Peter in the other direction. Now, you see that crown on Jesus? That's the brilliance of my graphic design. I just had to point that out. That took me 15 minutes to figure out. Jesus, he's trying to take us to selflessness because he knows, and actually you already know, that that's the best direction for you to go. Going back to the teaching, then Jesus went to work on his disciples. I love the Message translation for stuff like this. Jesus went to work on his disciples. Jesus is about to lay it on thick. And I'm only going to give you part of the teaching that Jesus gives here because it's so good we can only cover the first part. But Jesus, he's about to just go to work on these disciples. Check this out. Anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. Well, duh, right? But then again, there's many of us that were like, hey, I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus. He's my Lord, my Savior. Yet, are we really letting him lead? Are we really surrendering to his will for our life? Are we really trusting in him with the things that matter most to us? Or we just kind of want him to be in the passenger seat riding along with the trip that we've planned? Anyone who intends to come with me has to let me lead. And then look at this. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. That's the big change that happens in this final stage of spiritual growth. And perhaps it's the hardest change to make. Because up until this point, Jesus is kind of like your helper, kind of like your coach or your trainer, or get you out of a bind sort of thing. But when you make this final leap, when you make this final transition, you let Jesus get into the driver's seat. And you say, take me wherever you would. Even if I don't agree, even if I don't understand. It's about this word, surrender. In 2013, I learned about surrender. I was transitioning from one job to hopefully the next, but I didn't know what that was going to be. I'd left working for the seminary that I graduated from, and I was hoping to become a pastor. And money was tight. And my wife, she didn't like her job. She's a physical therapist. And we had a 2-year-old. Sophia was 2. And my wife was fighting thyroid cancer. And things were tense between us. And we didn't know what the future was going to bring. And because of the stress and the unknown, I think we started to kind of turn on each other, as I think a lot of young couples do. And we were fighting, and it was bleak, and it was difficult and painful. And I wanted to fix it. And I wanted to change the scenario. In fact, I agreed to look for jobs outside of ministry because I thought if I just got a stable job, that would fix things. And so I applied. I started networking and trying to get into the corporate world and that sort of thing. And I was just trying to fix the situation. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the interview. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fix things at home because there was just so much tension and we were just scared with the health issues and the financial. And I started to pray. And I started to learn about surrender. And I started to put into action this idea of faith that we have. God, help me do the things I can do to be a better husband, to be a better father, to be better in terms of looking for work. And then let me truly trust you with the things I can't change, the things I desperately want to change, the things that are creating pain for me and my loved ones. But let me surrender that to you. And that was a process. In fact, I would stop at this park on the way home and just spend 10 minutes walking, praying, just trying to collect myself before I went home because home was tense. But you know what happened? As I began to surrender this heavy burden I was carrying around that I could do nothing about, okay? My hands became free. My mind became free. And that's when I thought of the idea of applying to become a chaplain resident, which is the work that I did before I came here. And I applied, and I did that program. It was a year long, and it was probably the best training and preparation for this work right now that I could have ever done. It set me up so well. All because I learned to surrender. And that helped me become free, to see what I could do, what God had available, even though things were not going like I wanted them to. And this makes sense because look at what Jesus taught. If you stick with this, living out what I tell you, you are my disciples for sure. Then you will experience the truth, and the truth will free you. And in my situation, the truth was there was many things I couldn't control that I was trying to control. And when I faced that truth and let them go, I became free. And you have a situation like that too where you just need to surrender. That there's something going on in your life and you trying to handle it on your own is not working. Or maybe it's the direction of your life. Maybe you're seniors and you don't know where this is going to go. And so you're trying to control that. And you should use your minds and plan and do the best you can. But at some point in time, you've got to surrender that God is going to take me where I need to go. And it might not be according to the plan I was looking at. But surrender. I tell you, I'd been a Christian for some time. I've been a youth pastor for some time before I learned about this. Before I even prayed a prayer of surrender. And so today we're going to end the service in the way that we started this series. At the beginning of the series, I asked the question, if you want to make progress in your spiritual life this year, that the first thing you could do is declare that you want to make progress. And you can do that sitting in your pews, but I made an invitation for you all to come forward because the reason that that's important is the very reason you don't want to do it. There's power in coming forward. It's awkward. It's out of your comfort zone. But that public expression of that private intention, just coming forward and praying to God, yes, I want to make progress. Or today, just praying, God, I want to surrender my will. You know what the good news is? You already know how to do this. You prayed the Lord's Prayer earlier today. It says, my Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done. That's a prayer of surrender right at the beginning of the Lord's Prayer. You pray it every Sunday if you're here. And so we're going to sing this last song, I Surrender All. And if you would come forward if you want to, you can stay for 3 seconds or 3 minutes, whatever it is, and just pray your own prayer. But I tell you, if you come forward, it makes a difference. That awkwardness is important. Come on up if you want to.